simply flow because of the years we've given, the sacrifices we've made, the memories we hold. But the truth is harder. Respect in old age is not guaranteed by biology, by blood, or by history. Respect has to be nurtured, protected, and sometimes even demanded by the way we choose to live. One of the most painful lessons I've seen is this. When parents in their later years begin to center their lives around visiting their children, constantly appearing at their doors, waiting for their time, their attention, their validation, something shifts. It isn't always love that grows. Sometimes it's irritation, pity, or even quiet resentment. And the respect that once felt like it belonged to you starts to slip away. Respect in old age comes from independence, not dependence. That single idea carries more weight than most people realize because it touches on how human relationships shift over time, how dignity is maintained, and how love changes form when generations grow apart. Independence in later years is not just about being able to walk, cook, or manage finances on your own, though those things matter. It is about the ability to hold on to your own identity, your own routines, and your own voice. It is about showing up in your children's lives not as someone who has emptied themselves to fit into their schedules, but as someone who brings a whole self into the room. Dependence, while natural in certain ways as we age, can erode the respect that our children and even society hold for us, not because they stop loving us, but because dependence changes the balance of how they see us. When we think of respect, we often think of being honored for our experiences, our sacrifices, and the lives we have built. And for a time, that respect is naturally given. Parents are seen as pillars, as guides, as anchors. But the reality of aging is that those roles can shift. And if one is not careful, the same children who once looked up with admiration may begin to look down with pity or even quiet frustration. Independence is the safeguard against that shift. When an older parent continues to live with purpose, whether through community engagement, hobbies, learning, or simply taking responsibility for their own day-to-day choices, the image that forms in the minds of their children is not one of fragility, but of strength. That strength translates directly into respect. Dependence, however, creates a different story. When an elder relies too heavily on their children, not just for essential care, but for emotional fulfillment, for constant company, for validation of their worth, it places a subtle but heavy weight on the relationship. Children may comply, they may love deeply, and they may show up, but their perspective begins to shift. They no longer see a figure who stands firmly on their own feet, but one who is leaning too heavily into their lives. That leaning, even if born out of love, can blur the lines between care and obligation. And when love begins to feel like obligation, respect is one of the first casualties. Independence in old age is not about pretending to be younger than you are, nor is it about denying the realities of health, finances, or energy. It is about owning your choices and refusing to dissolve into someone else's world. A parent who says, "I have my own plans today, but I'd love to see you this weekend," communicates strength, boundaries, and balance. A parent who calls every other day asking, "What are you doing? Can I come over?" unintentionally signals that their own life has emptied of meaning outside of their children's presence. The difference between those two stances is the difference between being respected and being tolerated. Another aspect of independence that fuels respect is the ability to continue growing. Too many people see old age as the final act, a time to simply watch life pass by. But those who pursue learning, curiosity, or even small adventures become living proof that growth has no age limit. When children see their parents reading new books, making new friends, exploring new places, or even just maintaining a routine of exercise or volunteering, admiration naturally follows. It shows vitality, it shows resilience, and it communicates a message that age has not stripped away the essence of being alive. Dependence, in contrast, tells a quieter, smaller story. It narrows the world to waiting for a phone call, a visit, or an invitation, and that shrinking of life can make others unconsciously shrink their view of you. It is also worth noting that independence is not selfishness. Choosing to live with dignity and strength in old age does not mean cutting off family or refusing help when needed. It means not building your entire existence around waiting for others to validate you. It means being present with your children without being consumed by them. It means showing love as a choice, not as a demand. That distinction preserves respect because it tells your children, I am here because I want to be, not because I cannot exist without you. That kind of presence feels like a gift rather than a burden, and people respect those who bring gifts more than those who bring need. On a deeper level, independence in old age teaches by example. Children and grandchildren watch closely, even if they don't say it. When they see you continuing to live fully, they internalize that aging does not have to be a collapse into irrelevance. They learn that self-worth is not something you give away when you retire or when your body slows down. They learn that respect is tied to how one carries oneself, and that lesson will echo in how they live their own later years. Dependence, on the other hand, teaches a different story. It teaches that age is only decline, that respect fades with neediness, and that the later chapters of life are ones to be endured rather than embraced. So the essence of respect in old age lies not in demanding it, not in reminding others of what you've done, but in continuing to show up as a full person. It is about choosing independence whenever possible, cultivating joy outside of your children, and living in a way that makes people admire your strength instead of pity your fragility. The more you embody independence, the more respect becomes not something you plead for, but something that flows naturally toward you. Constantly visiting children can unintentionally diminish dignity. At first glance, this might seem harsh, even counterintuitive, because the bond between parent and child is supposed to be unbreakable, filled with warmth, and naturally sustained by presence. But as families grow, roles change, and responsibilities shift, what feels like love and closeness from the parent's perspective can sometimes be experienced as intrusion or dependency from the child's perspective. And in that gap, dignity can be lost, not because of ill will, but because of how human relationships adapt to new realities. When parents make it a habit to show up too often at their children's homes, they may believe they are expressing love or keeping a connection alive. But over time, the visits can feel less like joyful reunions and more like obligations for the children, especially if those children are balancing careers, raising families of their own, and managing the countless pressures of adult life. The very act that was meant to nurture love can start to erode respect. Children begin to see their parents not as visitors who enrich their lives, but as figures who demand time and space they cannot always freely give. And when love becomes entangled with pressure, dignity is what suffers. Dignity in old age is tied deeply to autonomy, boundaries, and choice. It is about being seen as someone who values both your own time and the time of others. Frequent, uninvited, or overextended visits create an imbalance where children may feel their privacy invaded, their routines disrupted, or their independence overlooked. The result is subtle, a shift in tone, a quiet irritation, or an undercurrent of guilt. over time, these feelings can harden into a loss of admiration. Instead of being regarded as wise and self-possessed, the parent is seen as needy, dependent, or unaware of boundaries. This perception, Ion, can strip away the dignity that should be the crown of old age. The paradox is that most parents in their later years do not mean to diminish their dignity. They often act out of loneliness, out of a desire to feel included, or out of fear of becoming irrelevant. The human need to belong does not fade with time. If anything, it intensifies. Yet when belonging is sought through over-attachment to children's lives, it creates a dynamic where parents unintentionally place themselves in a position of asking rather than offering. Dignity comes not from being constantly present, but from being present in a way that feels meaningful and welcomed. Consider the difference between a parent who drops in frequently, unannounced, and one who calls ahead, respects their children's schedules, and makes visits occasional but intentional. The first might feel like a constant shadow in the children's world, while the second feels like an honored guest. The first slowly wears down boundaries, while the second reinforces them. The first risks being resented, while the second is respected. It is not the presence itself that diminishes dignity, but the imbalance between what is given and what is taken. Dignity is preserved when children continue to see their parents as figures who bring joy, wisdom, and inspiration, not as figures who drain energy or disrupt balance. This is why it is crucial for parents to cultivate lives that do not revolve entirely around their children. When visits are less frequent but filled with stories of personal adventures, new discoveries, or interesting pursuits, children experience their parents as vibrant individuals with their own identities. The parent is seen not as someone who comes to take, but as someone who comes to share. And sharing, unlike dependence, elevates dignity. There is also an unspoken truth about respect. It is tied to scarcity. Things we experience too often without boundaries lose some of their value. Just as a constant background noise fades into annoyance rather than pleasure, constant presence can dilute appreciation. A visit every now and then feels special, anticipated, and cherished. A visit every other day without space for longing can feel routine or burdensome. Parents who understand this dynamic can protect their dignity by ensuring that their presence never becomes overfamiliar to the point of being undervalued. It is also important to understand the generational divide in how time is perceived. Younger families often live with the intensity of packed skoske, ages and competing demands, while older parents may experience slower days with more free hours. Without realizing it, parents might interpret their availability as alignment, forgetting that their children are living within a different rhythm. When visits are constant, this difference in rhythm becomes a point of friction, and children may feel misunderstood or even pressured. Protecting dignity means being aware of this reality and respecting the pace at which others live. The deeper meaning behind avoiding constant visits is not about withholding love, it is about choosing love that honors both sides. When parents decide to live full, independent lives and see their children as part of that life rather than the whole of it, their presence becomes lighter, freer, and more deeply appreciated. They are seen as people who choose to share themselves, not as people who cannot exist without their children's presence. That choice communicates strength, and strength is the soil where dignity grows. In the end, dignity is not about demanding respect, but about living in such a way that respect is the natural response. And one of the most overlooked ways to preserve dignity in old age is to resist the urge to make constant visits, to trust that love can remain strong without constant physical presence, and to build a life rich enough that your children see you not as dependent on their world, but as someone who continues to thrive in your own. A fulfilling life beyond family keeps admiration alive. This truth is not always easy to embrace because, for many parents, their entire identity for decades has been centered on raising their children, protecting them, and sacrificing for them. Once children are grown, married, and building their own lives, some parents find themselves feeling empty, as though the best chapters have already passed. In that emptiness, they may cling more tightly to their children's lives, believing that constant involvement is the only way to maintain relevance. But admiration does not grow from clinging. Admiration grows when children look at their parents and see them still vibrant, still curious, still engaged with life outside the walls of family responsibility. Living a fulfilling life beyond family is not about loving your children less. It is about showing them that your life is too vast to be confined to one role. When you continue to invest in yourself through hobbies, learning, friendships, community work, travel, creativity, or even quiet spiritual growth, you communicate to your children that your sense of self is intact. They begin to admire not just what you did for them in the past, but who you are right now. That admiration builds respect, and respect in old age is one of the greatest gifts you can receive. Children may not always articulate it, but they notice how their parents spend their days. A parent who sits idly waiting for phone calls or visits sends the message that their world has shrunk to the size of their children's availability. On the other hand, a parent who shares stories of meeting new people, reading thought-provoking books, volunteering in meaningful ways, or discovering new interests reminds their children that life is still full of possibility. This kind of living sparks admiration because it embodies resilience and growth, qualities that children has, in hope to carry into their own later years. There is also a psychological dimension to this. When parents live only through their children, it creates pressure. The children may feel as though they must constantly provide entertainment, purpose, or validation for their parents, which over time can lead to frustration or even avoidance. But when parents cultivate their own fulfilling lives, the dynamic shifts. Time spent together becomes lighter, freer, and more joyful because it is no longer about filling a void, but about sharing abundance. Admiration flows more easily when people feel they are receiving rather than being drained. A fulfilling life beyond family also strengthens the bond between generations in unexpected ways. When parents pursue their own passions, children often feel inspired and proud. A son who sees his father taking up painting at 70, or a daughter who sees her mother traveling with friends at 80, will speak of them with admiration to others. That sense of pride reinforces love and respect, creating a cycle where independence leads to admiration and admiration deepens connection. Without this, the narrative can become one of pity, where children speak of their parents with concern rather than pride. Another layer to this idea is how it impacts grandchildren. Younger generations look to elders not only for comfort, but also for models of how to live. A grandparent who is alive with curiosity and joy teaches them that old age is not an end, but a continuation of growth. A grandparent who has nothing to talk about except the routines of waiting teaches a quieter, more diminished lesson. The kind of legacy you leave is not only in the stories of what you once did, but in the example of how you continue to live. Admiration is built when grandchildren see grandparents still engaged, still meaningful, still capable of creating joy outside of family roles. Living beyond family does not mean severing ties or reducing love. It means expanding the field of your life so that family becomes a part of your joy, not the whole of it. A garden, a community project, a book club, a spiritual practice, or simply the habit of walking and appreciating the world can all serve as anchors that give you meaning outside of children. These activities create depth and dimension, which children naturally respect because they see that your identity is not fragile. They know you are still whole, still strong, and still alive with purpose. The admiration children feel for parents who live fulfill. Ling lives is also tied to freedom. They feel free to love without guilt, free to visit without feeling obligated, free to admire without the weight of pity. This freedom strengthens relationships because admiration thrives in an environment where love feels chosen, not demanded. A fulfilling life signals to your children that you are not sitting in silence waiting for them, but instead walking your own path with dignity. That knowledge allows them to walk toward you out of joy rather than out of pressure. Ultimately, admiration in old age comes from embodying the very qualities you once hoped to pass on to your children: resilience, curiosity, growth, and strength. By continuing to live fully and independently, you show them that the values you taught them were not just words, but practices you yourself embody. You give them the gift of seeing old age not as a collapse, but as a continuation of life's richness. And when they see that, they do not just love you, they admire you, they respect you, and they carry your example forward in their own lives. Respect is cultivated by showing strength, boundaries, and self-worth. These three qualities form the foundation of how others perceive us, especially in old age, when the balance of relationships begins to shift and the temptation to lean too heavily on family becomes strong. Strength does not mean pretending to be invulnerable, but it does mean demonstrating resilience, courage, and the ability to handle life's challenges without collapsing into helplessness. Boundaries do not mean cutting people off, but rather honoring your own needs and respecting the needs of others. Self-worth does not mean pride in the shallow sense, but a deep recognition that your life still has value, purpose, and dignity beyond what others provide. When these three qualities are present, respect is not something you ask for. It becomes something that naturally surrounds you. Strength in old age is not measured by physical power alone. It is about the ability to adapt, to face health challenges with grace, to manage daily routines with persistence, and to show that your spirit has not been broken by the passing of time. Children and grandchildren watch closely how elders respond to difficulties. A parent who faces illness or limitation with bitterness and constant complaints may unintentionally invite pity rather than admiration. A parent who faces those same challenges with acceptance, humor, and determination becomes a source of inspiration. That kind of strength cultivates respect because it reflects courage. People admire those who rise to challenges without giving up, and in old age, that admiration is a powerful way to maintain dignity. Boundaries play an equally important role. Many older parents believe that unconditional love means constant presence, endless availability, or sacrificing their own needs for the comfort of their children. Yet in practice, this can blur lines and eat dependency. True respect is built when parents show that they value their own time and space and that they honor the boundaries of their children as well. When you make it clear that you have your own routines, your own commitments, and your own rhythms, your children recognize that you are not simply waiting for them to give your life meaning. Likewise, when you respect their boundaries, by not overstepping, by not demanding their time, and by understanding the pressures they face, you demonstrate emotional maturity. This mutual respect strengthens the relationship and ensures that your presence is seen as a choice and a joy, not as a demand. Self-worth is perhaps the deepest layer. In old age, many struggle with feelings of invisibility, as though their contributions no longer matter and their voices carry less weight. It is tempting to look to children for validation, for signs that you are still valued. But true self-worth cannot depend on others. It has to be cultivated within by recognizing that your story, your experiences, and your presence still have meaning, regardless of how often you are included in your children's daily lives. Self-worth shows up in the way you carry yourself, in the pride you take in your appearance, in the way you continue to learn and grow, in the choices you make that reflect your values. When you treat yourself as someone who is still worthy of care, love, and dignity, others respond in kind. People mirror the way you treat yourself, and if you project worth, they return respect. The interplay of strength, boundaries, and self-worth creates a powerful impression. Imagine an older parent who manages their health as best they can, who pursues hobbies and friendships, who shows up for family gatherings with warmth but not neediness, and who communicates clearly about what they want and don't want. That parent radiates presence. Their children do not see someone who has collapsed into dependence, but someone who remains a strong individual. They admire the ability to balance closeness with independence, love with boundaries, vulnerability with dignity. That admiration is what keeps respect alive. On the other hand, when strength is abandoned for helplessness, when boundaries are erased in favor of constant intrusion, and when self-worth is surrendered in exchange for validation from others, the dynamic changes. Children may still love, but their respect quietly fades. They begin to see their parent not as a figure of authority and inspiration, but as someone who has allowed time to strip away their dignity. Respect cannot grow in that soil because respect requires the recognition of another person's strength and wholeness. Another important aspect of cultivating respect is consistency. Strength shown once is admirable, but strength practiced consistently becomes identity. Boundaries respected occasionally are helpful, but boundaries honored regularly teach others how to engage with you. Self-worth expressed in fleeting moments can uplift you, but self-worth practiced daily becomes the very lens through which others see you. Old age is a time when consistency matters even more because it communicates reliability, steadiness, and clarity of character. Children and grandchildren find it easier to respect someone who consistently embodies these qualities rather than someone whose self-image fluctuates based on outside attention. Respect also grows. It's when these qualities are not only practiced for yourself but modeled for others. When your children see you setting boundaries, they learn to set their own. When they see you value yourself, they learn to value themselves. When they see you remain strong in the face of challenges, they gain courage for their own struggles. In this way, the respect they feel for you is amplified by the lessons they internalize. You are not only living with dignity for your own sake, but also teaching them silently how to live with dignity in their own later years. Strength, boundaries, and self-worth are not abstract ideals. They are daily practices. They show up in how you